They called the black woman too ugly to marry. The millionaire removed the bag and she collapsed. They had a way of making cruelty sound like tradition. In that small town with manicured hedges and ironed reputations, an annual ritual turned humiliation into a pastime. An evening of roses and chandeliers, where lineage passed as currency and gossip masqueraded as truth. That was where they decided the fate of those who dared to stand too close to their velvet rope. And on a cold September morning that crept into an unforgiving evening, they decided to aim their ritual at one woman, dark-skinned, composed, and unwilling to fold. The crowd did what crowds do. It studied her like a specimen. The posture too proud, the eyes too steady, the presence too stubborn to disappear upon command. They whispered old words that have always tried to make themselves sound new. That she did not belong, that she was unworthy, that she was too much of what she was and not enough of what they demanded. The hall sighed with perfumed certainty. The judgment was casual, thoughtless, inherited. But there are moments when a single soul can puncture an entire performance by refusing to act in it. She stepped forward anyway. It startled them when a powerful outsider took notice. The kind of figure whose signature could move markets and whose presence could silence rooms. An unexpected patron of both technology and truth, he had no interest in their pecking order. He studied the room the way engineers study a stress fracture, noting exactly where the structure would split once the right pressure was applied. He recognized the quiet in her gaze, the quiet of someone who had endured storms without broadcasting them. In that instant, two trajectories, one built of hubris and one hammered out of endurance, tilted toward collision. They had seen her before, of course. The town never truly forgets the people it tries to erase. Years earlier, she had worked in the very halls that now draped themselves in self-congratulation. She had filed papers, fetched signatures, and watched as charity was dressed up like theater, while money vanished behind the curtains. She had found inconsistencies back then, numbers that felt slimy to the touch, transfers that smelled of deception, ledgers that winked with a different set of rules for the powerful and their friends. Idealism had pressed her forward. Influence had slapped her back. They smeared her, drove her out, rewrote the story with the speed and precision only money can buy. And the town, eager for a villain it could recognize, believed what it was instructed to believe. Exile can end a life, or it can refine one. She chose refinement. While the town leaned deeper into its myths, she invested in skills. She learned how financial crimes travel like shadows, where they hide, how they bend around light, when they lunge. She studied patterns and pressure points, trained with those who chase smoke back to the fire, and charted how small-town prestige can shield big-time theft. She stitched together a network of people whose currency is not doors, but keys. Forensic minds, principled journalists, attorneys with a taste for the long road and a disdain for shortcuts. Brick by brick, year by year, she built a quiet arsenal. So when she returned, it was not as a penitent, not as a curiosity, not even as a guest. She came back as an audit wrapped in human form. She rented an office on the most visible street and gave it a simple name that sounded like both a promise and a warning. People scoffed. People watched. People adjusted their smiles. The family at the center of the town's theater, wealthy, lacquered, admired the way a museum displays a crown, did not take her seriously. They had survived worse, they told themselves, which is what people say when they have never truly been tested. Their patriarch polished his legacy with the same cloth he used on his cufflinks. The daughter perfected a smile that could slice and sparkle at the same time. The heir rehearsed entitlement like an anthem. They spoke of contribution, of tradition, of the long line of giving that proved, at least to them, that they were necessary. And then the letters began. Not the kind that can be thrown away or answered with a bouquet. Notices to donors asking to confirm how their money had been spent. Queries about transfers routed through friendly banks. Requests for invoices missing signatures and receipts that appeared only after they were needed. The clink of tumblers in locked cabinets. The shuffle of papers pulled from the backs of drawers. Small sounds that announced a much larger noise on its way. In living rooms where they never used coasters and in offices where pens were always aligned, anxiety found a chair. The heir tried menace first, the way people who have been indulged from birth try menace. It felt like acting. It sounded like thunder, and it accomplished nothing. The patriarch convened attorneys. The attorneys recommended caution. The daughter doubled down on pageantry. Pageantry bounced off reality and rattled back. It is hard to bully math. It is impossible to intimidate facts that have already been notarized by time. The outsider, the mogul who had seen through rooms like this in cities across the world, offered what power seldom does: the technology to separate truth from rumor at scale. He shared tools designed to track what is not meant to be tracked, to match amounts and dates in ways that reveal a choreography of theft. Quietly, as most honest labor is, the work progressed. Forensic accountants trace charitable dollars the way botanists trace rivers, upstream, downstream, to the tributaries where transparency evaporates and private islands appear. Journalists mapped connections, contractors linked by shared addresses, shell companies reincarnated under new names with identical signatures, travel itineraries that mirrored the disappearance of funds. Lawyers built a bridge of evidence sturdy enough to carry the weight of what would have to cross it. The town tried to pretend it didn't notice, but denial has a heartbeat, and it was speeding up. Donors canceled galas without excuses. Friends delayed lunch without explanation. Phones buzzed and then stopped buzzing altogether. The family's smiles began to look like masks worn too long. Through it all, the woman kept time not with vengeance but with patience. She met with federal auditors in rooms without windows and took careful notes. She offered names only when necessary, dates with precision, documents with provenance, testimony with the taste of restraint. Enough to be heard, never enough to be dismissed as noise. She refused to let anger shape her strategy. Anger is a spark. Strategy is a furnace. The date she chose for the reckoning carried its own dark poetry. Almost to the day of her exile, almost to the hour of her public shaming. The same hall, the same stage, the same chandelier shedding the same indifferent light. Only this time, the front row belonged not to gossip but to consequence. Federal prosecutors sat with case files stacked like bricks. Agents waited with the stillness of a held breath. Reporters calibrated their equipment and their restraint. The town filed in because the town cannot resist spectacle, even when it turns the mirror toward itself. When she stepped to the lectern, no one shouted her down. No one rolled their eyes. The quiet was not generous, it was terrified. She did not tell them who she was. She showed them what had been done. A timeline unfolded, 15 years summarized in transactions, each entry a bruise, each misused donation a fingerprint. Funds meant to feed children and warm homes had paid for yachts, for flights, for the kind of luxury you can only enjoy if you refuse to look out the window. Receipts matched to withdrawals, matched to deeds, matched to smiles captured in glossy magazines. Sometimes justice arrives as a gavel. Sometimes it arrives as a spreadsheet projected 10 feet tall. The patriarch rose with practiced indignation. Authority, after all, had always worked for him. Authority sat down. Agents with badges do that to a room. The heir searched for exits that were no longer there. The daughter's mascara began to tell truths she never would. The donors, those who had believed or wanted to, turned pale. It is difficult to digest that your generosity fed a machine designed to grind the poor into press releases. Then came the part no one can style away. The announcements. Assets frozen, accounts seized, indictments read, calmly, like weather forecasts of a storm already underway. The family's empire, once airbrushed into legend, revealed itself as scaffolding held together by theft. And as the cameras found the woman who had been told to know her place, they captured something that will always terrify the shameless: the absence of gloating. She stood in that light not as a conqueror, but as a witness. After the microphones were unplugged and the agents did what agents do, the town shuffled into the lobby to practice its new version of the story. This is what communities do when truth finally catches up. They call it a reckoning and then rehearse who they were the entire time. A benefactor pressed her hands into the woman's and apologized the way only people with resources know how. The woman nodded. She understood that apologies cannot reverse a ledger, but can begin to balance a soul. Consequences kept their promises. Trials replaced parties when invitations change hands. The patriarch learned that fences cannot keep out time. The heir learned that the state does not care where your grandfather sat. The daughter learned that tears flow the same in silk as they do in denim. The mansion, once an altar to reputation, changed occupations. Built-in closets filled with gowns found a second life. Storage rooms for donated blankets, shelves for textbooks, corners where a child could sit with a tutor and finally be seen. The pool became a place to teach water safety. The ballroom turned into a gym on Tuesday nights and a job fair on Saturdays. A building exhaled, finally relieved of duty to vanity. The woman did not remain to take a victory lap. There is a point beyond triumph where purpose demands relocation. In a city of columns and hearings, she accepted a role most people will never see and most headlines will never celebrate. She lent her maps of deception to those charged with following them. She trained others to detect siphoned dollars hiding under titles like consulting and miscellaneous. She built a method out of her pain and handed it over like an instruction manual. Here is what to ask. Here is where to look. Here is when to stop trusting glossy brochures and start trusting arithmetic. Her days filled with flights and forms, affidavits and audits, phone calls with people who finally felt like they were not crazy after all. She testified when testimony was needed. She wrote when writing would outlast a news cycle. Workshops, case studies, quiet victories. She collected messages from small towns that looked eerily like her own. Letters saying thank you, messages saying we didn't know how to fight until we saw you do it without screaming. One arrived from a teenager who had grown up inside the theater of a counterfeit charity and wanted to study the science of telling the truth. Another from a mayor who had campaigned on transparency and needed a blueprint to make it more than a slogan. She answered them all. And still, there were days when she remembered the first night, the stage, the whispers, the scorn that had wrapped itself around her like wire, not to nurse wounds but to take measurements, to remind herself how cheaply lies are sold and how expensively they are undone. She let the memory do what good memories do. Even when they are bad, guide, not govern. When the magazine covers arrived, lists of influence named among stewards of the public trust, she smiled and set them aside. Influence is flattering and useless unless it becomes infrastructure. She preferred budgets to bouquets, training modules to interviews. The outsider who had helped slice through the fog would occasionally join her at a lectern and describe the software that had underpinned their work. He touched the code. She explained what to do with it. Together they answered questions about privacy and power and the ethics of peering into places that prefer the dark. Neither of them forgot that algorithms are wrenches, not hands. Back in the town that once applauded the wrong people, a square was renamed. It is how communities repent when they finally learn the shape of their sin. Children gathered with ribbon cutters too large for their fingers. The plaque was simple. It did not say her name louder than necessary. It spoke of dignity. It reminded those who passed through that charity without honesty is theater. And theater does not warm a single bedroom in January. Years turn, and some of the dust settles. From time to time, letters arrive from places with cinder block walls and fluorescent lights. Remorse is a visitor that arrives inconsiderately, often at 3 in the morning. Tears stain paper. Apologies ask for the impossible. She keeps some of them in a thin folder, not to reopen wounds, not to grant absolution she was never asked to grant, but to remember how systems are built. One person at a time saying yes to comfort and no to conscience. She believes in consequence and cultivation, not in hating individuals when the real enemy is rot. And if you are listening closely, if you let the rhythm of this story settle inside your ribs, you will hear the lesson that keeps pulsing beneath every scene. Beauty and worth are not currencies for the powerful to accept or reject at will. The rooms that judge faces always misjudge character. The rituals that crown the unworthy will always collapse when the ledger is finally read. The cruelest lie is not that some are too ugly to be loved or too different to be chosen. The cruelest lie is that gatekeepers are necessary. They are not. Locks do not create value. They only prove fear. Her victory never asked for applause. It asked for architecture, the kind that turns broken money into repaired lives. The kind that re-engineers entire towns so that theft faces friction and goodness gets momentum. It asks for a new definition of glamour, a classroom with enough chairs, a pantry that never empties, a shelter whose lights do not flicker, a payroll that arrives on time, a policy with teeth, a database that catches the lie before it lands. If you came here for a fairy tale, take this instead. A blueprint. A blueprint for anyone who has been told to know their place. Learn the system, outlast the sneer, collect receipts, honor patience more than rage, refuse the theater, build a team that prefers proof to noise, choose consequences over claps. And when the lock finally clicks on the door that kept you out, do not kick it down for spectacle. Remove the hinges so no one after you has to learn how to break. One day, perhaps sooner than you imagine, you will stand where someone once laughed at you. It will not feel like revenge if you have done it correctly. It will feel like oxygen. You will recognize that the point was never to humiliate the ones who humiliated you. The point was to make the stage useless for cruelty. The point was to change what the room is for. And when the lights dim again in another hall, in another town, and another mouth prepares to say that someone is not enough, too plain, too poor, too brown, too loud, too quiet, let this story interrupt the script. Let it arrive like a hand on a shoulder in a voice you cannot dismiss. The truth does not need permission, and dignity has never asked for a vote. She was told to shrink. She expanded. She was told to accept the measure assigned to her. She recalibrated the scale. They called her unworthy to be chosen, and she chose service over spectacle, truth over tradition, structure over rumor. She wore their insults like ash, and from that ash built something that will outlast them all. Because the most radiant crowns are not jeweled at all. They are forged in patience, burnished by restraint, and worn invisibly by those who rebuild what deceit has broken. And if there is any final line to engrave beneath this story, it is simple enough to fit on a plaque, a grant application, a classroom door, a mirror. You cannot bury light. You can only delay the moment it teaches you how to see.